What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim, and we have TJ Burkle from Common Fan Podcast making week 2 picks with me. TJ, how you doing, man?
Good, Zach. How are you? Thanks for having me, man.
Doing good. We got a big one in Lincoln this week. How you feeling about it?
It's a big week in Husker Nation. I'm excited. I'm nervous. I feel like the Huskers have the better team, but we've had, we need to prove it. So we'll get it. I know we'll get into all that, but there's optimism, just generally speaking, not just Colorado week, but generally speaking, optimism is sky high from the Iowa border to the Colorado border to the South Dakota to Kansas to everywhere. Like, optimism is sky high right now.
As it should be.
Yeah.
As it should be. Reigning freshman of the week, Dylan Raiola.
Yes, sir.
Winning it over a pretty impressive performance from Jeremiah Smith, might I add. It was if not for Dylan Raiola's performance, Smith would have gotten that award, but Raiola well-deserved on that. So we'll see if he makes it 2 for 2 this week.
Oh, we sure hope so. He certainly looked the part against UTEP.
Yep. Well, let me, I'll just say, for those of you listening here, again, thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like, subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Hit that like button, subscribe. And of course, if you want good Nebraska content, go over to the Common Fan Podcast. Follow them on Twitter. Follow them wherever you get your podcast. TJ, where can they find you?
Well, the easiest way to do it, the one-stop shop, is our website, www.commonfan.co. But yeah, we're on YouTube. We're on all the podcast platforms. We're on Twitter and Facebook and all the rest. Subscribe on YouTube for sure. Check out the pod. We're pretty active on Twitter as well. Common Fan Podcast.
Yeah. And you can, I'm sure, if you want more breakdown of Nebraska, Colorado, I'm sure you can go there and find some good content throughout the week. So
we got a new episode out this morning. We'll have another one out tomorrow morning, where I think we got into a little bit of Colorado stuff on this latest one today, but I think we'll get into more of that for tomorrow's episode. And then we're starting to do a little more written content with the pod too. So you can check that out on the website as well.
Very cool. And for those of you listening, that means it's already out because this is dropping Thursday. So
right. Okay. Yeah. So they'll both be out. They'll both be out when you're hearing this.
Yeah. So go over to Common Fan after this. We will get to Nebraska, Colorado at the end of the show, but we're just going to go through, there's 15 games, which, remember back in the good old days when there were 14 teams?
Barely
last year.
Barely. I'm old enough to remember those days, but just barely.
The good old days. The traditionalists are just rolling in their graves right now. Western Illinois takes on Indiana on Friday, 7:00 p.m. Eastern on the Big Ten Network. There is no line. There's no betting line because it's Western Illinois. Indiana should probably win handily. TJ, any concerns from Indiana after week 1?
No, I don't think so. I think Kurt Signetti, aka Mo Green, is I think he's got those guys playing well. I think they're going to be better this year. I don't know how much better. I want to believe that Nebraska is going to beat them down in Indiana, which is week 7 for us, I think. But anyway, I think they take care of business against Western Illinois and get to 2-0.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's probably 3+ score win. They won 31-7.
I was going to say 2 to 3 touchdowns. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's going to be similar. Continue to get that team to gel with Rourke at quarterback. I really agree with you there.
Yeah.
Big game Friday night is Duke 1-0 going to Northwestern 1-0. Interesting line. It's a 2.5 spread in favor of Northwestern. So Northwestern, a 2.5-point favorite, 9 p.m. on FS1. Interesting note here is that the spread for Miami of Ohio against Northwestern last week was -3. So what's your take on this game, TJ?
Well, first of all, I always love it. Don't they play every year, Duke and Northwestern? I feel like they always have a non-conference game every year, don't they? Like, it's like the two smartest non-Ivy League schools decide, well, we should play each other in football every year just to show everyone else that we're smarter than them.
I think It's either them or they had like a series with Stanford for a while, and then now it's been Duke for it feels like every year for the past decade. So
It really, yeah. Anyway, I don't have a good handle on where Duke is, to be honest with you. I really like David Braun. I think
Mhm.
he's a really good coach. So I'm going to go with Northwestern. I'm going to say Northwestern by about 6. Um, and I think it's interesting. Braun seems like he came out of nowhere and is like another perfect fit, a la Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern. Just a
Yeah.
guy who can squeeze the absolute most juice out of the orange and just get the team to play above its talent level, so to speak. And so I was always a big Pat Fitzgerald fan. I'm a big fan of Coach Braun. So I think they'll figure out a way to win it. I'm kind of bummed with the new conference situation that we won't be playing Northwestern every year, because for whatever reason, we just had some absolute, like, we always seem to go to the wire with North. I mean, I don't think they ever blew us out. We blew them out a few times, but then any close games, like we've had overtime games with them. We've had Hail
Yep.
Mary games with them. There's just been kind of some crazy Northwestern games. So anyway, but I think they'll pull it out in the battle of the Brainiacs.
Yeah, I think your instinct on this is really good. I've got 17-10 Duke or Northwestern over Duke. I think a few things on this game that concern me for Duke. They could not run the ball against Elon. As Elon, like it's not a good team, and so I'm concerned about that. Malik Murphy's their quarterback now. He had a decent game, but he turned the ball over once against again a not good FCS team.
Yeah.
The one way I see this game going sideways on Northwestern, Mike Wright, I thought played a decent game. But what kept them from extending the lead on Miami of Ohio, he fumbled twice and lost the ball twice. So a couple turnovers from that spot, but they were able to run the ball well against Miami of Ohio, who is the favorite in the MAC. Like, I think people don't realize, like, Miami is a good team this year, at least from
all,
group of 5.
all the Miami boats are rising this year.
Yeah, that's right. It pained me to put Miami as my ACC favorite after this past
Oh,
week,
I
but
know.
I was kind of idiotic for putting Florida State there to begin the season. So I'll take the L on that one. But yeah, like, I think Miami of Ohio is better than people realize, and Northwestern is more tested than Duke. I think they get them, especially at home.
Yep, agreed.
All right, we'll shift over to Saturday, September 7th. We're not gonna do Texas Michigan yet. We're gonna save that towards the end. Bowling Green at number 8 Penn State. It's a 12 p.m. kick on the Big Ten Network. Penn State coming off, honestly, I think a huge win where I thought they showed a lot against West Virginia in Morgantown. Penn State's a 34.5-point favorite. Any letdown after the game in Morgantown for them?
I don't think so. I think that Penn State team is really good this year. I think for me, they're probably my number 3 or 4 best, third or fourth best team in the Big Ten. I would put them ahead of Michigan. I would, I want to see more from Oregon. I might put them ahead of Oregon after this
Yeah.
weekend.
Yeah.
And so I just think Penn State's really good. I think it's one of James Franklin's better teams, and I think they're going to roll this weekend.
Yeah. One thing to note, Bowling Green has a back, Stewart, 161 yards on 14 carries and 3 touchdowns last week. Now, it's not against great competition, but something to watch out for. Like, how does this Penn State defense account for a back who has some explosiveness? But I'm right there with you. I think the line play was really good for Penn State last week. I think that's going to continue to improve. I love Drew Aller's fire in that game. And Harrison Wallace really stepped up as a receiver in that game. So it's telling to me, Julian Fleming transferred from Ohio State to Penn State. I don't think he was targeted last week. So like that tells me that the receiver room is elevated
Yeah.
because I think a lot of people expected Fleming to be at least a number 2, and
Right.
he's not even the number 2 at this point. And that, I love Fleming. I think he's a great guy, uh, good player in his own right. But that's encouraging because I think that means the receiver room is elevated. So I agree. I think it's going to be Penn State covers in
Yeah.
this game. It might be people might be biting their nails if they bet on this game. I think maybe Bowling Green gets a late score to make it close, or maybe
Sure.
backdoor cover, but I think they take care of business.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
Rhode Island at Minnesota, 12 p.m. on Peacock. No offense, Minnesota deserves to be on Peacock because of what PJ Fleck just did. Um, I, uh, I, yeah, I like Minnesota this year, but I don't like PJ Fleck. So that's my confession.
What's the line in this one?
There is no line yet.
Okay.
It'll probably come later this week, but right now, no line. And tickets are as low as $7. So if you want
Oof.
to go to that game, do you think there's a letdown here for Minnesota, or do you think they kind of rebound here?
I think watching them play is generally a letdown.
The guys
But
from Sky U Pod are very upset right now.
I know.
Um,
I think they'll win by about 10, and like it'll probably be like 10-0, or 13-3, or something like that. No, I mean, I think they're gonna. I think they're gonna take. I don't know a lot about Rhode Island's program this year, but I think Minnesota will take care of business. But I feel like they're like every year that goes, like I feel like PJ's first few years, like in 2019, they won 11 games, and it looked like they were like really an ascending team in the conference. And I feel like he's like gone more in the direction of Iowa since then than anything else. And I appreciate the fact that he emphasizes physical play and his traditional sort of Big Ten West type of program. But he coming from Western Michigan, he always had like good receivers there. I thought they would be more dynamic on offense, and that hasn't proven to be the case in recent years, I feel like. So
yeah.
they're going to win. And maybe it'll even be a blowout because maybe they'll just run all over the field or something. But I'm not sure what to make of this Minnesota team this year, especially after that loss that probably shouldn't have been a loss.
Yeah, this is where I think there's hopefully some optimism for Minnesota. Is I hope that they use this game to get Max Brosmer and that air attack on track. Because I made this point on my recap show Tuesday morning. You brought in Max Brosmer to become more dynamic on offense. You have a really good receiver in Daniel Jackson. You have other guys who you think can step up in that receiver room. Don't waste him with conservative play calling.
Yeah.
Like, don't waste this guy. And that's what I felt like they did against UNC. And so I would not be surprised if the score is closer than people want. Like maybe like a 17-21 point win.
Yeah.
But if it's a 17-21 point win, but they're trying to get the passing game on track, and they're making, throws downfield, and they're like mixing up the play calling, that would be better to me than if it's like a 35 point win where they just run the ball all the time. Because granted, they are a running team and they need to be able to establish the run, but you've got to complement that with a guy like Brosmer if you're going to bring him in. Otherwise, why are you bringing in Brosmer to begin with?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So, but I think we're agreed. They'll win. They'll avenge.
They'll take care of business.
They'll take care of business against the mighty Rhode Island team that neither of us know much about.
I don't even know Rhode Island's mascot. Keep talking. I'm going to look it
up. 12 p.m. Also on the Big Ten Network is Akron at Rutgers. Akron, of course, got beat up physically by Ohio State last week. The quarterback was knocked out within the second quarter. He went out of the game twice and was out permanently after the second quarter. Rutgers won by 38 or 37 over Howard. Rutgers a 23-point favorite. They're at home. Does Rutgers keep on rolling?
So Rhode Island is the Rams, and their mascot is Rhody the Ram. Okay,
Wow.
RHODY, Rhody the Ram. Yeah, I
That is
think
your
Rutgers.
interesting fact for the day. Rhodey the Ram.
I think Rutgers keeps on rolling. Not to keep putting things through my Nebraska lens, but the front part of our schedule lines up favorably, and our first 7 games, I think we're going to be favored in all of them. The one that makes me the most nervous is Rutgers out of those. That's the reason I bring that up, to give you that context. I think Greg Schiano is a really good coach. We've played them, I want to say, twice since they joined the Big Ten. And both times we won them both. We probably didn't deserve to win one of them. Both times just really physical games.
Yeah.
Like I think, we'll probably be the more, talented team when we play a team like that. But you always get nervous about a Rutgers because they'll probably play pretty good defense, and they'll be really physical, and they'll be really well coached. So I don't think they're going to have any problem this weekend. And I think this could be Schiano's best team. And so I think Rutgers could be in the top 25 in a few weeks.
Yeah, I agree. And especially with the struggles that Virginia Tech just had. Like I thought before the season that Virginia Tech might win that game. They still might, but you lose to Vandy. Gives me a lot less confidence in you as a team, even if it's at Lane Stadium. I agree with you. I think the thing that compounds for Akron is I think they're just physically beat up. I mean, I was at the Akron game last week for Ohio State, and they just crushed people. Like, I mean, it's just some of the hits, and I'm like, now you got to play a Rutgers team who is physical. To your point,
right.
I think you're talking a 300-yard rushing day for this Rutgers team. I think Monangai, he broke his own personal best last week. He might break it again because I don't know if Akron A has the horses, and B, I think they're just going to be tired. I think Rutgers wins 4 to 5 touchdowns.
Yeah,
Like
no,
I think
I think they'll just take care of business, no problem.
Yeah. 3:30 on the Big Ten Network. Washington hosts Eastern Michigan. Washington, a 27.5-point favorite. Of course, they're coming off a 35-3 win against Weber State last week. Again, does Washington, any trouble here with this new kind of reformed roster?
I don't think so. I still don't have a great handle on Washington. I did a little write up on, ranking the 4 teams coming into the Big Ten, and, probably sounds obvious, but Washington was number 3 for me, behind Oregon and USC. Of course, everybody's ahead of UCLA, I think, probably. I don't have a good handle on them still. They had dozens of guys leave and added a lot in the transfer portal. I didn't get a chance to watch or even see highlights of their week 1 game. But it's Eastern Michigan, and so I think they'll take care of business. If I don't bet, Zach, but if I were a betting man, I'd probably stay away from this one. That line feels a little high, and especially teams that are going through a lot of transition, like Washington is. You want to see more, you want to have more data and more information, and see more before, maybe they're only 2 touchdowns better than Eastern Michigan, or maybe they're 8 touchdowns better than Eastern Michigan. I don't know. I'd probably stay away from this one if I were betting, but I think they'll win comfortably. I'm just interested to see, given the fact, so fascinating that less than a year after they're in the national championship game, they come into the season not even in the top 25, right? Yeah. So where does this team end up? And I think they'll probably, I think they can get it going again pretty quickly, but I feel like this transition year is kind of a wild card.
Yeah. So I dropped my water bottle on the ground, and I'm like, I got to get this thing because my throat is like.
Don't worry. We didn't hear it thud on the ground or anything. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Just on YouTube, it'll look very, very odd. What is he doing? No, I think your point about staying away, again, I'm not a betting man. If I were, this is the game that everything about this game is stay away.
Yeah, right.
Eastern Michigan won last week. like, so I don't know how they are in the MAC. And I think to your point, and I think we're seeing this throughout the transfer portal era, is when you have a lot of new pieces, I think it's exciting, but there's transition period. And I think we're seeing that with a lot of teams, both in the Big Ten and outside the Big Ten. So I I think Washington wins. I don't think they cover.
Yeah.
But again, watch out for Jonah Coleman. 16 carries, 127 yards, 3 touchdowns last week at running back. He is maybe the most underrated back in the Big Ten. I think he is a like really talented runner, and I think he is going to give some folks nightmares in the conference. I think,
Okay.
even though I think Washington, I don't have them doing super well this year, but I think Jonah Coleman will keep them in games for sure. So
Interesting. Well, I think Jed Fish is a good coach. I think what he did at Arizona was really impressive. But again, like you got to expect a transition year one and two. Like you can have a top 25 top 25 team that's, I don't know, 8th in the Big Ten or something. I mean,
yep.
it's just like the conference now is so good and so deep and so well coached. It's just like, I mean, that's where we find ourselves trying to get back to, the Nebraska of old. It's like, man, there's a lot of hurdles. There's not just one Oklahoma that we have to get over, or an Oklahoma and a Texas or whatever. There's 5, 6, 7 teams that you got to surpass if you want to win this conference. So anyway,
Yeah, it's a new world.
it really is.
For
It
sure.
really is.
And and UCLA has to dodge teams like Hawaii. I mean, it's crazy
Oh my
just
God.
how
I don't they have a bye this week? Doesn't UCLA have a bye? I was like, I'd love to, if we have time, we can make fun of UCLA at the end.
They do have a bye this week. They do have a bye. I got to be careful though. I love the guys over at Bruin Source. They're great. Another College Huddle affiliate. But I think they would agree that UCLA was a bit rough.
Really,
A bit
definitely,
rough.
definitely.
Actually, speaking of rough performances, Wisconsin struggled against Western Michigan last week. They take on the mighty South Dakota somethings. I don't know what their actual name is other than South Dakota. This is not South Dakota State. It's
South Dakota State is the Jackrabbits. I'm gonna have
yeah.
to. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
You're like TJ. You're a great researcher. I'm just like, I don't know this thing. You're like, we're gonna figure this out.
We're gonna figure it out. Thank you. It's a thing called Google.
Nice. Google is great. South Dakota is going to Wisconsin.
Oh,
What
I knew that. Coyotes.
the Coyotes? Badgers versus Coyotes. That feels like an interesting, just wildlife
That
like
would be a great
fight.
wildlife scrap. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
I'm
that might be
really
more entertaining than this football game. But
Yeah, right, right. Well, I don't think Wisconsin has a problem with South Dakota this weekend, but I'm really interested. When we were searching for a coach and ultimately hired Matt Rule, who I love and we all love now at this point, I wanted Luke Fickell. I
yeah,
wanted Nebraska to go get Luke Fickell. The guy took Cincinnati to the playoff. He's got Big Ten experience. I think he's considered, one of the best coaches one of the better coaches in college football. And maybe Wisconsin will still maybe he'll still prove that at Wisconsin.
mhm.
I was, again, you give a lot of grace in a transition year, but what were they, only 6-6 last year? I think
7-6.
maybe
Yeah.
7. Yeah. Well, so 6-6 in the regular, before the bowl game. I don't know what to make of that team. I was really surprised by the week 1 score and kind of the close game. And you just think about that. I don't think this is fair because Wisconsin hasn't fallen like we fell for a long time, but people make the comparison of firing Paul Chryst to when Nebraska fired Frank Solich, who,
Mhm.
that Solich's last team went 9-3. Solich always had a winning record, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, so we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but it's thinking about how Wisconsin's always at least top 25, usually top 10 or 15, always a great defense, always in the conversation. They're navigating away from what they were really good at for a long time.
Mhm.
And sometimes when you do that, you end up in the wilderness for longer than you expect. So I'm not predicting that. I don't know that. I'm just saying I've been, Nebraska almost beat them last year. We weren't very good last year. So, I've just been curious. I'll be curious to watch this Luke Fickell project unfold in Madison.
Yeah, this is actually maybe a rabbit hole that is worth going down.
I love a good rabbit hole.
So I think Wisconsin wins. Like, I think that's obvious. I think I have always, and I'm a Fickell guy, like as an Ohio State guy.
Yeah.
So I want to see him do well. I have always been concerned of whether his coaching will match the Power 5 level or the Power 4 level. So, like, very good at Cincinnati. But there's a lot of coaches that do well in the MAC or in the AAC. I mean, I know Cincinnati's Big 12 now, but
we know at Nebraska, we know.
Yeah. and it concerns me.
Scott Frost.
Anyway. Yeah. Right. How could I forget? But can you scale to a higher level of competition? And I always go back to the Alabama-Cincinnati game, which I know Alabama is awesome, right? But the thing that stood out to me from that game the entire time was it seemed like you went there to pick up a check and not actually compete. Right. Like, you weren't aggressive. You weren't you just didn't go after it. Like you were more concerned with what the score looked like at the end than actually trying to win the game.
Right.
And that might have ended up in a 50-point loss instead of like a 20-point loss. But that always kind of irked me a bit to be like, man, it felt like you were coaching not to get embarrassed.
Right.
And maybe that's the wrong take, but I'm concerned about Wisconsin because you're making all these changes. And I'm like, are you actually making the changes? Are you actually going after it? And are you actually fitting the culture as you're doing it?
Yeah.
And I think to your point, like, to go air raid, but also match a power run game to it. It's like, in theory, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So that concerns me. I think the other concern, Tyler Van Dyke, I thought he would be better. And I had the same thoughts about Tanner Mordecai a year ago. And I'm like, is there just something up with who they're targeting as their quarterback?
Yeah. So
I want to see Van Dyke light it up against South Dakota, because if not, they're going to get drubbed by Bama.
Right.
I think that's right. So this is it's a huge game for Wisconsin to kind of prove that they can figure it out.
Yeah.
So and we're gonna see how good Western Michigan is this week, because they're gonna go up against Ohio State, and like, if Western Michigan, is closer with Ohio State than we expect, which we'll talk about that game in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Then, maybe I'll change my tune.
Yeah. Then you give Wisconsin some grace, but
yeah. But yeah, am I wrong in thinking that with Wisconsin?
No, I don't think you are. I mean, again, I get it's a new era, right? We just talked about this, and it's going to be really, we've talked about this on our show. Just getting to the playoff is the new winning the conference, right? Like, which means you could, top 3 or 4 team in the Big Ten, which, who in the history of college football has ever strived to be the 4th best team in their conference. But in this new era, that would probably get you to the playoff if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC.
Yeah.
So like, I say all that to say, I get what Wisconsin's thinking. They don't want to do what they've always done. They don't want to be good, but not great. They want to aim for the top tier of the conference. And so that's why they got rid of Paul Chryst. And Paul Chryst maybe could have gone 7-5 for the next 10 years at Wisconsin or something. Maybe that wouldn't have been good enough and all that. But I just think there's that program. We have a historical connection with Wisconsin because Barry Alvarez played at Nebraska. And then he took the Bob Devaney model and implemented it at Wisconsin. It had physical teams, defense first teams, all those things. And so, I just feel like that program had a lot of things going for it. And there's probably a way to embrace the history and tradition of what you've always done without adopting the air raid or whatever. I mean, Frost always said he was going to bring Oregon speed and that Oregon offense and combine it with Husker power, and it never worked. And so again, there were a lot of reasons why Frost didn't work. So maybe Fickell will figure it out. I don't know. I'm just with you. It feels like a weird time for them. And again, like I know from experience as a Husker fan, again, people think Nebraska fans just want to go back to running the option and maybe the glory days of the 90s will come back. I understand you have to evolve and adapt. But making wholesale changes right as so much change is happening across the college football landscape, I feel like you risk getting sucked into the space-time continuum and, having a hard time finding your way out or something.
Yep.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but
no,
yeah.
I think you evolve, but you maintain the same principles and core.
Yeah. Right.
And I think you're speaking, I think, to what maybe where I'm concerned about is rather than like they say they want to keep the same foundation, but are you actually fundamentally changing that foundation with what you're trying to do? And I think that's a good, I was gonna say Nebraska does, like you guys do have good experience in that with the Scott Frost experience. And I think there were other issues with Scott Frost besides that, but
lots of them. Yeah.
I hope Fickell, like I hope what we're saying isn't true of Fickell, because I think he's a good dude. I want to believe that he is a good coach, but I am concerned about his ability to scale up from Cincinnati. So they win. I think they'll win. There's no line, but I think they'll win. But they better work on some stuff if they want to keep it close with Alabama next week.
No doubt.
Western Michigan takes on number 2 Ohio State, 7:30 p.m. on the Big Ten Network. I just realized I'm doing these rankings. When I say the rankings, the AP poll hasn't come out for this week yet, or maybe it did come out
as we're recording or something. Yeah, I haven't seen it.
So these rankings are outdated as of listening. So I apologize for that. 7:30 on BTN. Ohio State's a 38.5 point favorite. I mean, they did not cover last week. It was I think a 49.5 point line. Ohio State started slow. Some interior offensive line struggles. They were down their best lineman, Donovan Jackson. Do they avenge their non-cover loss this week?
Yeah. I think Ohio State blows the doors off of Western Michigan. I think they're the best team in the Big Ten. I think Ryan Day's on a mission this year. I think they have the best talent in the Big Ten, and I think they've got something to prove. And so, yes, I think that they'll come out. They'll have no problem in this game. I think they'll win by about 50. And I'm just nervous for when Nebraska goes to Columbus on October 26th. But hopefully by that point we're 7-0 and it's some sort of like top 10 matchup or something like that.
That would be good. And I'll tell you, I think Iowa, Ohio State, Nebraska, Ohio State, I think are going to be underrated matchups. Like I think everybody's talking about the Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, but I think defensively Iowa and Nebraska, they can junk you up. And I think offensively, watch out. Iowa scored 40 last week. So
I know wasn't it? What was it? 6-0 at halftime though?
Yeah.
Come on. Let's not forget that.
Yeah. But I think Ohio State wins comfortably as well. I think it's Western Michigan really, I think probably poured itself out for the Wisconsin game. And I think they're going to be spent. And I think Ohio State takes care of business.
No doubt.
We'll do a couple of the other maybe smaller games, and then we'll kind of hit some of the bigger games of the week. USC coming off a huge win over LSU. I super impressed by the coaching staff because I thought LSU from a roster perspective was better. I thought the lines were better, and yet USC pulled it out. Miller Moss was, I thought, phenomenal.
Yeah.
They play, I think, a decent Utah State team. 11 p.m. BTN Big Ten After Dark.
Love it. Love it.
USC a 28.5 point favorite. Who you got in this one?
USC. I told you about my write-up ranking the new teams coming into the Big Ten. I had USC as number 2, which again, once I sat down to do it, it was pretty obvious which teams fit where. But I had a little caveat in there that I said I'm not sold on USC. And if you watched that team last year, that was one of the worst tackling teams, just basic tackling that I've ever seen. And so I know they made a lot of changes and they got rid of their defensive coordinator before last season was even over. And Lincoln Riley made some comments about coming to the Big Ten and saying that's just football, maybe have an extra tight end, but whatever. And so for all those reasons, I was like, yeah, they're going to have to prove it, this, that, and the other. And we'll see what happens when they get into Big Ten play. But it's impossible not to be impressed by that win over LSU, like you said. And so I think they have no problem whatsoever this weekend. But we go to LA and play USC on November 16th. And I think I'm definitely much more nervous, at least after one game. I'm much more nervous for that game than I was even a week ago. Not that I thought, we'd for sure win, but I thought we had a decent shot. I thought it'd be even whatever. I think we could be. I think Lincoln Riley might have some special sauce with this team this year. I think they could be very, very good.
Yeah, I agree. And they kind of won in a Big Ten style, with a walk-off, well, not walk-off, but almost walk-off running touchdown.
Right.
That's how it's done, PJ. So I think USC, I don't know if they cover. I think there might be a little bit of a hangover. It's a short turnaround from Sunday to Saturday, but I don't think they have a problem. I think maybe it's a 21-point win.
Yeah.
Something like that. But even maybe a 24. They could win by 28 and still not cover. So I think I would imagine it's going to be something like that, where I think they're probably, they're a little spent. They might be a little sluggish, but I think they win by multiple scores. They just don't cover. So
Yep.
This game's interesting. Boise State on the road in Autzen against, at least right now, the number 3 Oregon Ducks. We'll see how the polls shake out. It's on Peacock, which I don't understand why this one's on Peacock, because Boise State's a group of 5 favorite to make the playoff.
Yeah.
Oregon, obviously Oregon is I feel like is must see TV. So I don't understand what NBC's doing here, but
right. And Boise's people know Boise State by now. For the last 20 years, they're one of the non-Power 5 teams that I feel like has developed. People know they're a good football school, and even when they're not, people think of Boise State as a good football school. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's very odd, but Oregon a 19.5-point favorite. They were very sluggish last week. Who you got in this one?
I'm going to go Oregon. So people, listeners to the Common Fan podcast know I married a Duck. So my wife went to Oregon, and I met her in 2009. So going back to the Chip Kelly days, but I've watched a lot of Oregon football just with her and her family over the years. And I pay attention to them more than I would another Pac-12 school over the years, for instance. Right. And always happy wife, happy life. We always pull for each other's teams. I always want the Ducks to do well. And so I was shocked, to be honest with you. We were on vacation with some family over the weekend, and we were kind of had our eye on that game, and we were watching it while we were having dinner. And it was kind of like, what's going on here? Well, they're gonna get untracked here sooner or later. And they took care of business. But it was just kind of surprising to see. I think they win. Just because of the uncertainty after last week. It wouldn't surprise me at all, Zach, if they win by 30 and they end up being the Oregon that everybody expects them to be the rest of the season. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think there's a little bit of uncertainty around that going into this week. Yeah. And so I wouldn't bet on that one. I agree. And then the other thing, didn't Boise State give up 40 some points to Georgia Southern or something? So they scored 56 points or whatever it was. Yeah. And so, but I think, I'm a big Dan Lanning fan. I'm super high on Dan Lanning for the long term for the Ducks. I still think that's probably a top 10 team this year. And again, we may see that the Idaho game is a complete blip on the radar, and they end up being best or second best team in the Big Ten. I just think there's like a little bit of uncertainty, like kind of like a what happened there feel after the Idaho game. And you kind of want to see them regroup and put a beat down on Boise State this week. But that's an interesting one. And it's too, like you said, it's weird that it's on Peacock, because I feel like that will be a game of interest across the country.
Yeah. Do you think Oregon's going to cover this one?
I'm going to say yes, just because Boise State's defense was so bad against Georgia Southern. And on the flip side, like they're not going to have nearly as easy of a time scoring points. Dan Lanning's I love it. I love it that Lanning's such a like physical defense first type of coach,
Yeah. I think I tend to agree with you. I think Boise, I would not be surprised if Boise gives Oregon problems. And I really wouldn't be surprised if Boise State covers.
Yeah.
Ashton Gianti, 20 carries, 267 yards, 6 touchdowns last week against Georgia Southern. So, I mean, they've got a back who can exploit teams. I think if you look at Oregon's defense, they got burned on a couple of trick plays against Idaho, and
right.
That's it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I think if the problem was Oregon's defense, I would probably actually pick Boise State in this game.
Right.
But I think Oregon will fix some of the offensive issues. They struggled with explosive plays, but they have guys who can be explosive. They've got Evan Stewart. They've got Tez Johnson. I think it's Jordan James is their running back, who's really good. I think they get more on track this week against a suspect defense.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think Oregon covers. I'll say 42-17.
Oh, nice. Putting a stake in the ground. I like it.
Yeah. I think 42-17, I think is the, I think Oregon gets it done. And I would not be surprised if it's like a matter of they knew Boise was coming to town, and so they're like, Idaho, who cares?
Maybe kept it pretty vanilla. Right.
So
for those who just saw me react, if you're watching on YouTube, my 2-year-old just walked into the room. So anyway, I muted it, but that was I almost leapt out of my chair. Anyway, she's got some good analysis too. We could get her take on a few of these.
I say she's got some real opinions on Oregon here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear her opinion on the Duck and what she thinks about.
She loves the Duck. We love the Duck. Yeah.
Was it the Nebraska? He was at the Nebraska press conference with a microphone. Was that?
He showed up. Well, didn't he do like a tour of a bunch of different schools? But yeah, he showed up, I think, at the Nebraska press conference, which was hilarious.
Yeah,
that was a great move by Oregon. That was hysterical.
The Duck is my favorite. I'm partial to Brutus.
Sure,
but the Duck is pretty awesome. The only Big Ten matchup this week, like full Big Ten matchup, Michigan State is coming off a rough win against Florida Atlantic.
Yeah.
Goes to Maryland, who just blew the doors off of UConn. Maryland only an 8-point favorite in this game. It's at Maryland. Who you got here?
I'm going Maryland. I think Jonathan Smith is a good coach, and I actually think he's a good fit at Michigan State, as angry as he made, all the Oregon State fans when he left. I just think they were really bad last year. And I think I think just Maryland is the more, again, we talk transition year. Yeah. And I think, Loxley's brought in some good talent at Maryland. I think he's figured some things out. And so I think Smith will have some good years at Michigan State, but I think it's going to take him a while. It's certainly going to take more than this year.
Yeah. And I think we saw that Aiden Childs is more of a project than we realized.
Yeah. Good.
Which doesn't mean that he's not going to be good at some point. I think some people, they forget, like they start thinking, oh, that's just who he is for life. And it's like, no, like he's got potential. It's just, he's got to develop and grow. And so I agree with you. I think I would not be surprised if this is a lower scoring game. The over under is 44.5. And I think people saw that Maryland scored 50, but I think Michigan State's defense has gotten better. And I think Maryland scores enough for this to be a cover, but I think Michigan State's going to really struggle in this game. I think it's going to be 31-6. Like, I think it's going to be a pretty bad. I just don't see how Michigan State scores against I think an underrated defense in the Terps.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with everything you said.
Yeah. Big rivalry game. Iowa State at number 25 as of now, Iowa. On CBS, I think Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson.
I love it.
Gary Danielson's going to be there. Gary Danielson gets a lot of hate. I love this crew.
I do too. I mean, they're one of the voices of college football to me.
Yeah.
It's like I never understand when people want to bash Herb Street. It's like he's like literally the voice of some of the biggest college football games of the last 2 decades. Anyway, I'm with you.
Yeah. So how Iowa is this of a line? 2.5. Like how Iowa.
I don't think I assume Iowa's favored.
Iowa's favored. Yeah. What's your take on this game?
I'm going to be a contrarian here because I don't know the last time Iowa State's won, but it's been a while. I'm going to pick Iowa State to win. I think it'll be close. I think it'll go down to the wire. You're probably talking about somebody kicking a walk-off field goal, which, if you had to pick a team out of a hat that would win a close field position game, it would be more likely to be Iowa. I don't have any like particular reason to do this other than I don't like Iowa very much, and I'm not going to pick them to win. And when we were in the Big 8 and the Big 12, we just beat up on Iowa State all the time. And so like, I don't have any ill will toward Iowa State. We just always took, had no problem with Iowa State. So, and I like Matt Campbell. I think he's a good coach. So you never know what's going to happen in these rival games. Look, I think it's agreed across the board that Iowa's got a really good team this year. They're going to be great on defense and special teams as always. I didn't get to see much from their game against Illinois State. I've never been the biggest Cade McNamara fan. Mm-hmm. Like when he left Michigan to go to Iowa, and like all these Iowa fans on Twitter were like, "Oh, here we go." I remember being like, "Okay." Like he was kind of a game. He got overtaken by JJ McCarthy at Michigan. You could argue that JJ McCarthy was a game manager. Like he was just kind of a game manager more than a playmaker. Maybe the offense will be a little bit better this year, but I loved it when it was 6-0 at halftime against Illinois State, and like all of Twitter is making the jokes about live, laugh, punt, or whatever. all the things.
That's live, laugh, punt.
So anyway, I don't know. I don't have any like. I'm not even sure it's what I really believe, but I'm going to pick Iowa State to win this game.
Yeah. I think there's reason to pick Iowa State. Kirk Ferentz is coming off suspension. I think there still are concerns about Iowa's offense for sure. I think where this game really breaks down, I want to make sure I have this stat here. Iowa State really struggled to run the ball against a very similar team in North Dakota that Iowa played Illinois State. North Dakota, like they played each other. North Dakota and Illinois State played each other last year. And I think North Dakota won by 1 point or something like that. But Iowa State, like if you look at how many yards they ran for 86 yards on 3.9 yards per carry. Iowa's offense, believe it or not, was almost 250 passing, running. And I think the team that runs the ball the best is going to win this game. And I just think it's going to be Iowa. I think Caleb Johnson is a good back for them. I think Cade McNamara, I don't think he's great, but I think he gives them enough. So I got it. I'll say 23-13. I just think that if you're one-dimensional against this Hawkeyes defense, I think that's going to be tough. But you're right. It's a rivalry game. Weird things happen. So like, I would not be surprised to see Iowa State take this, but I just think that rushing battle is going to be key. And if you're one-dimensional against this Hawkeyes defense, I think that's going to spell disaster.
I think everything you said makes sense, but I'm just not going to pick Iowa to win.
Spoken like a true rival. There we go. That's what we're on. This is what this show is about. We're fans, and that we're gonna be honest about that. So
Absolutely.
I respect you for that. Um, another underrated game, and especially after this past week, Kansas, ranked in the top 25, goes to Champaign to take on Illinois. Altmaier had a great game last week. I thought Illinois' defense really showed up. Kansas splattered them last year, 31-13, and it wasn't that close. Can Illinois keep this close? Can they even win? Kansas is 6-point favorite.
I'm just noticing that's a half hour before our game with Colorado. I really wanted to watch that one. Maybe I'll catch the first half hour of it. I think Kansas wins this one. I think they're just further along as a program. Maybe some of this is because Illinois wasn't very good last year.
Yeah.
We caught them at a time that they were really, they kind of bounced back and won 3 out of 4 after we played them. Thankfully for Nebraska, who also wasn't very good last year, we caught them at just the right time, but still they weren't very good. So I think they're probably better this year. I'm kind of curious, Bielema's first couple of years almost felt better than what he's done recently.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, like if that's just who they're going to be, or if they can take a step forward this year. But I think regardless, they're probably a 6-6 to a 7-5 team, or maybe a 5-7 to a 7-5 team. Illinois is, whereas I think Kansas has the trajectory has been in the right direction for however long it's been, 2 or 3 years. And I think I just think they're going to win by 10 to 14 points.
Yeah. I really want to pick Illinois. I really want to pick Illinois. I think there's a pathway for Illinois to win. But I think Illinois is going to have to level up to do it. And I agree with everything you're saying, TJ. I just think Kansas is a step or two ahead. And even though it's at Illinois, I just think it's gonna be a little too tough, particularly with the explosiveness in the running game. Like Devin Neal combined with Daniels at quarterback. I think Daniels is a little loose with the ball, throwing the ball at times. Like he throws a lot of interceptions. So like that's one way Illinois can stay in this game. I think another is if Altmaier, who I think is underrated as a QB, like if he has a really good game against that defense, I think there's a pathway. I just think Kansas is probably going to make 1 or 2 more plays than Illinois will. I've got it close. I actually think it's going to be a field goal game. I've got 34-31. Kansas win this game. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it's 34-24 and then Illinois scores to make it closer.
Okay.
But
yeah.
I think it's going to be a duel. I do believe in Altmaier. I think he's better than people think he is. And I just think Kansas is just I agree with you. I think they're a hair better.
I really like Lance Leipold too, and I think he's done a great job at Kansas. It's hard to, history has shown it's hard to win there. Yeah. And I think he's building something there. So anyway.
Yeah, agreed. I think you're right. You're right on there. The big noon kickoff game, Gus and Joel covering this one. Number 4 Texas at number 9 Michigan. Texas a 7-point favorite. Give me your key to the game and your score prediction on this.
Talk about a game where you just wish you could pick both teams to lose. You
wouldn't hate Texas, would you?
Maybe just a little bit. I think Texas is going to win by 14 points. And I think, or more. And I think Michigan is going to end by the end of the season. Michigan's going to be more like bottom half of the top 25. And I think, Michigan still has a really good defense. and really good defensive line. And so I think the key to the game is, how well Texas can move the ball and how well they can pass the ball. But I just think Texas has a lot more talent. And I think Michigan, I just have this sense, and it's totally not based on any data or any metrics or any player evaluations, but I just have this sense there's other stuff swirling around at Michigan. Harbaugh's not there anymore. They obviously still have a ton of talent. They're presumably not stealing signs, at least as well as they used to. And I think for all these reasons, they're gonna. I definitely think they lose to Texas, and I think they're gonna end the season somewhere like 15 to 25th in the top 25. That's what I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm on record. I think Michigan makes the playoff, although I am concerned after what I saw this past Saturday.
And they were slow out of the gate against Fresno State.
Yeah.
Which
Now Fresno is not a bad group of 5 team.
No. My co-host calls them Frez yes.
That's good.
I'm not sure it was his original thought, but maybe it was. Yeah.
That's the opposite of the Purdue. Instead of Purdue, it's Purdue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Although I do like, it'll be an interesting game with them in Notre Dame next week. This is hard because I think the one place where Texas I have question marks with them is the interior of their lines, and that's where I think Michigan has a strength. Especially that
absolutely, yeah.
So I think but I agree with you in this regard. I think Will Johnson got caught a bit last week, just being a little too aggressive, and he got burned a couple times against not as good receivers as he'll face this week against Texas. And I just don't think the quarterback situation, I think they would love to have Cade McNamara right now. I don't mean that facetiously. No. And Davis Warren's a great story, right? He had leukemia, beat leukemia. Now he's the starting quarterback for Michigan. But I think if you talk to Michigan officials, they wanted Alex Orji to win the job, and he didn't. He couldn't. And to me, that just screams this is a quarterback they don't necessarily trust. I think they trust him to be a game manager, but he can't run very well. I think Alex Orji is obviously a run threat that they'll have a package for. So I'm concerned about that. I think Donovan Edwards is just he's not Blake Corum.
Yeah.
And I think Khalil Mullings is going to be their bell cow, and I think he's good. But I think if you're counting on Donovan Edwards to be the bell cow back, who is the guy who makes you guys makes you go, he's not that. He doesn't have great vision, really good in space. But I think if you don't have a dynamic threat in the backfield, I think Texas is going to be able to hunker down and just kind of just sit on you.
Yeah.
So I think Texas wins. I've got 34-17. I think it'll be close at half.
Yeah.
But I think Texas does take over. Don't be surprised if Michigan has a lead early in the second half. I think there's a possibility where Mason Graham or Josiah Stewart makes a play, or even Will Johnson makes a play, maybe has a defensive score, and you're Michigan could do this. But I just think Texas has too much offensively, and I don't think they're going to be able to keep pace, and that's going to get them into trouble.
Okay.
All right. You want to do this one? The last one? Nebraska hosting Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. NBC 7:30 nighttime game. My favorite color analyst, Todd Blackledge, is on the call.
Todd Blackledge, yep.
So good. Nebraska's a 7.5 point favorite. First question out of the gate. Does that line surprise you?
No. Why would it surprise me? It should be bigger or smaller?
Smaller, or even that Colorado might be favored.
Not really. I think some of the shine has worn off of the Colorado situation. I mean, when we played them in game 2 last year, they had just beat TCU, who, coming off a college playoff appearance. I don't think anybody realized that they were going to be much worse last year. So they just beat TCU, and all that when they beat at the end of our game, when it was clear they were going to win, Gus Johnson said this is the biggest story in all of sports. And so the Coach Prime hype train was off the rails last year. I think some of that shine has worn off.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting, this is just, so first of all, like Husker fans, like we Nebraska owns, I should have looked it up. We own the historical series against Colorado.
Yeah.
I mean, we beat them all the time when we would play them every year. But they beat us twice. We played them in 2018 and 2019 in the Frost era. We talk about this on our show. There's games you could have won and games you should have won. We absolutely should have won both of those games, and just, we killed ourselves in both of those games. And then last year was just, it was such a mess. It was a turnover. It was like 13-7 in the third quarter or something. And so it was still a game, but we just could not do anything on offense. Our offense was so bad all of last year. We kept turning the ball over. And so they ended up winning, 36-14 or something. But it's hard, in my opinion, it's hard to take a lot from last year. But then we went on and maybe, did a little more than people expected. I think Colorado went on and lost a bunch of games, and so I don't know. There's definitely a lot of hype and optimism around Matt Rule's program in year 2 for Nebraska. I love the matchup. I think it favors Nebraska. I think I think it's going to be like a top 5 atmosphere at Memorial Stadium. I will not be able to be there, unfortunately, but I think it's just going to be electric at Memorial Stadium, and those fans are going to be out for blood. I just think if you're a Husker fan in recent years, we've been snake bitten so many times, and it's been so painful. It's just hard not to have PTSD. And, here we've got Dylan Raiola, this great true freshman quarterback who looked awesome in week 1, Big Ten freshman of the week in week 1. People were favored to win the game, all these things. It's like, it's hard not to have this creeping feeling of, can we hold on in a close game, or can we hold a lead, or can we avoid turning the ball over 5 times, or all these things that have happened to us over and over and over again in recent years. But I think both of our lines are better, and I think it is Shedeur, and Coach Rule said yesterday, with Shedeur and Travis Hunter, we might be facing 2 of the top 5 players in next year's NFL draft. I mean, they absolutely have talent, especially at the skill positions. And the other thing that concerns me is, like, they brought in, I mean, how many transfers did they bring in? 60 again this year. They brought in a bunch of new transfers. I think they did that last year. I think it was over 70 or over 80 last year. People figured out what they were doing and what they were about by 4 or 5 games in. So that's the other thing that makes me a little nervous to play them in game 2 and see what they have up their sleeve in game 2. But here's what I would wrap up with. Sorry, that's a lot of babbling. Here's what I'd wrap up with. I think Husker fans would say these programs are like 2 ships passing in the night. I don't think there's a lot of belief that Coach Prime is going to be in Boulder for 10 years, or that he's really interested in building something for the long term. And I think there's a big belief that Coach Rule is going to be at Nebraska for a long time. He's all about development. He hasn't raided the transfer portal nearly as much. We've really told everybody, if you want to stay, you can stay when he got there. Really about building a foundation for the program, building a culture, as much as that word is overused, being a developmental program. There's a belief that that's taking hold, and that we're going to turn a corner this year. And I think there's a belief that, Coach Prime is all flash, and they're going to have some talent. They're going to have some skill talent, et cetera. But they're going to end up as a 4 or 5 win team again. I think, at least judging by what I see on Twitter, there's a belief in the Colorado fan base. I could be wrong. I don't want to speak for them, but I think there's a belief that, like, it's the new era of NIL and the transfer portal, and you have to get with the times. And he's doing it differently than anybody's ever done it before, bringing in all these new transfers every year, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's fine to say. I wouldn't say it's been proven yet. I wouldn't say that model's been proven yet. And I even if we lose to them, which I really hope we don't, I don't think that's a bowl team again this year, Zach. I think that's maybe like a 5-win team again. So here's what I think. I think we're better at both lines of scrimmage. As long as the offense can just not turn the ball over. So even if we punt instead of throw interceptions or fumble, I think I trust our defense to keep us in this game the whole way. Last year, our problem was we kept turning the ball over and we kept giving it to them on the wrong side of the field. Yeah. And, we still ended up making stops or forcing field goals in a lot of those scenarios, but it just ended up being, too much by the end of the game. So I like our chances. I just, as a snake bitten Husker fan, I'm just super anxious and nervous about this one. And Husker fans are all in prove it mode. We're all in there. Husker fans are believing a lot this year, and they're believing a lot in what Matt Rule is doing, but we've done this too many times. Like, we got to see it now.
Yeah. No, and I think that makes a lot of sense, because it hasn't been prove it mode for a year. It's prove it mode since Mike Riley.
Yeah, no doubt.
I mean, so it makes sense as to why. I think the thing where this could really go off the rails for Nebraska is if Dylan Raiola has a typical freshman type game. And I think what gives me optimism is that I don't think Nebraska has to rely on Raiola to win this game.
Right.
Like, I mean, the game was over by halftime with UTEP.
Yeah.
And they're averaging close to 5 yards a carry. I think that is their recipe for success: is strong defense, control the clock, play action pass. And I think you're absolutely right. While I think Colorado can sting you with their playmakers, I think the key to this game, well, a couple keys to this game is obviously the trenches, but you tell Raiola, you do not throw towards Travis Hunter.
Right.
Like, everybody else certainly throw it, go after him, but you do not go after Travis Hunter. Like, just stay away from him. And I don't think they have the defensive skill. I have a theory about the transfer portal, and I appreciate what you're saying, TJ. I think teams that complement their roster with the transfer portal will always do better than teams who load their team up with the transfer portal.
Yep.
So, I think Michigan is actually a really good example of this. Like, Michigan has gotten a lot of transfers, but it's never been the core of their team.
Yep.
It has always been like they've cherry-picked guys in positions of need. Like, that's what Ohio State did this past year. I think it's what Georgia has done. It's what Nebraska is doing. And that's always the better way to do it, because you then have people with growing up in your program.
Yes, right.
And so what Prime is doing, I look at the amount of turnover, and yes, you may not know how to figure them out, but also they have to figure out how to coalesce, which I think is part of their problem on the lines.
That's a good point. Yep.
So I really like Nebraska. I think they cover. I've got 38-24, and I was telling you pre-show, I think Colorado scores late to make it look closer than it is. I think it's a pretty big win for Nebraska.
I love hearing you say that, Zach. I hope that's the case. And I'm with you. I think I want to see us the first couple of drives really pound the rock, and really see that we're establishing the line of scrimmage, and that we can hold the ball. But we're gonna have to convert. We're gonna have to get in the end zone, all that. But no, I love hearing that. Again, I think it's gonna be a raucous environment. I'm really excited for Saturday night. So
yep. Likewise. TJ, remind us again, where can we find you?
Appreciate that very much. A Common Fan Podcast. You can just search Common Fan Podcast on YouTube, or we are on all of the streaming platforms, or the major audio streaming platforms. You can find it all in one place, commonfan.co, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. We've been ramping up our written content as well, so you can keep up with all of the fun, frivolity, and Husker football obsessing right along with the Common Fan. So would invite any Husker fans to do so.
Please, and make
and
sure
anybody else for that matter.
Yeah, make sure you like and subscribe there.
Yes, please.
Great pod and great guys. So TJ, thanks for joining us. This was super fun.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Thanks, Zach. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. For the rest of you, take care. God bless.